So obviously tonight we're doing something on the pro-life issue. We're going to talk about the pro-life dialogue. It was, obviously Kayla's going to do the intro, but just letting everybody... Obviously Kayla's doing the intro because we'll let ladies go first. So anyways, pro-life dialogue featuring Kayla Lanning Weber. Go ahead.
So we wanted to start this. I sent out the survey, and this was something that we had several people kind of mentioned, and we're not going in depth today. We've done training as a house multiple times, so we weren't going to go back and do from square one training again, because we've done it 2 or 3 times. We do it pretty much every semester. If that's something that you're interested in, I have a resource document that I'm using for different articles and things that I was looking at in putting together this presentation. Somehow tonight, communicate to me your email address, preferably Gmail if you have one, and we'll get that to you, or these slides if you're interested in that. Okay, so why you need to be ready. This keeps coming up in conversation. You see it in headlines whenever there's a new bill that's passed. They say anti-abortionists or pro-abortionists are saying this or saying that. And it's something that at some point is going to come up in conversation if it hasn't already. And if you sit there like a deer in the headlights and have no answer ready, then just like with anything in apologetics, it's not going to speak well to whatever side you're trying to speak for. So this is something that we want to plant the seed, get you thinking about how do you articulate this. And a lot of these conversations happen sort of trial by failure, right? You learn by getting out there and realizing, wow, I don't have a response to this argument. I don't know what to say. So that's kind of what Josh and I are here for. We've been doing this for many years, especially between the two of us. We've gone through training multiple times. These are conversations that we're in a lot. That's actually kind of the history of how Valid Worldview got started. So we wanted to do a pro-life outreach, and no one would sponsor us because there's, I say us, Josh, because there's no Christian group on campus that was ready to stand up for it. But we are. We're going to, and if you're going to be a part of our group, then we want you to be able to as well. Okay, that's probably more than we need. Okay, so this is the 10-second pro-life argument. If you've never succinctly tried to say why you're pro-life, if someone comes up to you, we live in soundbite society, right? Someone comes up to you and says, "Why are you pro-life?" Right? And you're like, oh my gosh, so many reasons. I don't even know where to start. This is a 10-second. It's not meant to be in depth. It's not supposed to answer every question, but it's just a real quick how to get the conversation started. The unborn are growing, they're metabolizing, they're responding to stimuli. Those are all the qualifications that we use for life. They fit those, they are alive. If they have human parents, they are human. And then we always try, this comes from Justice for All, Stephen Wagner put this 10-second together, but we really try to have these conversations in a question format because it comes across as less aggressive. So we say, would you agree that? And then make your statement, as opposed to just making a bunch of statements and trying to aggravate people. So it's, don't you think that living human beings are valuable and have rights that should be protected? And that's just the real quick 10 seconds. So a lot of the basic arguments that you're going to hear are, what about the women in cases of rape or incest? Basically any unwanted pregnancy that was forced upon them, right? And this is something that it's a very emotional argument, and it's something that's really hard to talk about. So your first step is always to sympathize and say, yes, I understand it. That's a horrible situation, right? You don't want to come across as cool. And then we go into whatever you can do to make sure that you're getting down to what the actual argument is. Because regardless of any of those arguments, it comes down to, is the unborn a human being or not? Right? Because that's really what it comes down to. Would anyone disagree? Because we're trying to blow through this really fast so we can get to something else, but if there's something that you're like, could you please explain that you're going too quickly, let me know. Okay, so the way that we do this is what we call a trot out the toddler, which is if someone says, let's take the case of rape. I know someone asked a question about that earlier. And you say, okay, let's say that a woman does get pregnant by rape, and she doesn't know about it for a long time, and then she gives birth to the child, right, and then she realizes the child looks like her rapist. And he grows up and he's 2 years old, and that's when she realizes it. Is it okay to murder the 2-year-old because she's going to have PTSD or something by looking at that? Most people are going to say no, hopefully. And you say, why not? Well, because they're a human being. Okay, so what's the difference between the 2-year-old and the unborn? Okay, and that's an example of how you would make sure that you're getting the conversation back to what the actual question is and not going off on a bunch of rabbit trails. Because you can sit there and argue the rabbit trails all day long, but you're not actually getting anywhere. So it's just making sure that you're staying on track in that conversation. Good? Questions? Comments? Okay. Okay, and the reason that this is important, and this will segue into Josh's part, is that if it is a human being, they have rights the same as you and I, because they're human. All human beings are equal, right? Does anyone disagree with that? Okay, because if so, we have a totally different conversation. But if you establish that the unborn is a human being, then they have the same rights as you and I. Or do they? Dun, dun, dun. Josh.
Okay, so what we've seen, so ever since Roe v. Wade, science has progressed to such a point, as Kayla was able to say, and Christianity, and the pro-life movement has done such an awesome job of hammering this issue that the question of whether or not the unborn is a human being is not even debated anymore. You might have some people who say, well, I don't believe it's just a clump of cells. It literally takes 10 seconds to refute that, and you're doing it with scientific reasons. But we also, as Kayla mentioned, we have this Google Doc with different links to different places that you can go to any biology textbook, any biologist, any scientist, and they're going to sit there and say, well, life begins at conception. It's not even disputed anymore. And as Kayla was saying, well, now you have this, you can use the trot out the toddler, so even the greater good arguments, well, what about the case of rape? Well, can you kill the 2-year-old? No. Well, why? Because it's a human. Well, the unborn's a human too. So what's happened is that the pro-life community has kicked the crap out of the pro-abortion community for the last 30 years. So they've finally come to this one stronghold, and it's a good stronghold, and it's a legal stronghold. Well, they sat there and said, well, this is the law, and we're not going to change it. And the whole premise of the legal debate is this question right here is rights. Because as Kayla just sat there with trying out the toddler, they'll sit there and say, okay, yeah, the unborn has a right, but it's subservient to the mom's right. It's my body, it's my choice. That's the higher right. So what we wanted to get into tonight with some of the questions is when you talk to people, well, I know the unborn is a human being, but I don't think that we should do anything legally to stop it. It should still be legal. What about the rights of the mom, etc.? So this is the new argument, and I was talking to Dave about this earlier, pertinent. So today there was a big ruling by a federal court that on this issue, basically they mandated that the federal government pay for an abortion for an illegal immigrant, and point being is that this is very, very, very relevant, and this is a highly litigated issue, and it's going to continue to be a highly litigated issue. Now let me tell you something about judges. Judges are supposed to be unbiased. Judges are very biased, and they very, very much care about their legacy and their opinion because what they say lasts forever. And they went to law school, and they got to read about the judges that everyone hates and the judges that everybody loves. And so you'll watch even Supreme Court justices will change their tune over the course of years and sway with, well, how's history going to look at me? So when it comes to the legal issue, us setting a very good precedent of kind of the argument and swaying public opinion on the legality issue is going to be very important for us to actually win the battle in the courtroom. So I want to be more discussion based tonight, and thank you, Kayla, for running through that. And again, she has so much information on just the basic pro-life issues, on the basic pro-life arguments, that you should tap into all of that. So my question is to begin is, what is a right? And anybody can answer this except for Brother Charlie, because I'm sure he'll have a better answer than what I will have. Or Brother Dave, he's not allowed to either. But everybody else, it's fair game. What is a right?
Something that God gives you.
Okay. Anyone else?
You mean like a legal right? Or just like he said, like your God-given
However you
rights?
interpret that question.
Yeah, however you interpret it.
I think it is so a legal right would be something that the law would protect you from. For instance, you have we have the amendments, the Constitution. I think those are our legal rights.
Yeah.
You have the right to remain silent if you're arrested. So you have the
Like your Miranda rights that you're talking about?
I gotcha. Cool. All right, so Webster's defines it, and this is Webster's 1828, so praise the Lord for that. As a just claim, an immunity, a privilege, and that all men have a right to the secure enjoyment of life, personal safety, liberty, and property. It's a just claim, it's legal title, it's ownership, the legal power of exclusive possession, enjoyment, etc. And there's a lot. You should actually get Webster's 1828 and open it up because it's about a whole page dedicated to the term right. But then the legal dictionary, and this is actually a very modern leftist, it's not good. Don't use this for anything else, but even they recognize it's a legal right is, or a right is that which is believed to grow out of the very nature of the individual human being. So, as was stated, it's God-given, and the reason that it's God-given is it's because you're inherently born with it. It's something that is just a part of your very nature. You are born with the right to life, very first and foremost, and the founders, they pointed to that, not as in like, they granted it, but it's a recognition of something that you are born with. And when someone takes your life, they're infringing on your right. You have a right to property. When someone comes and takes your property, they are infringing on your right to property, etc. Now you hear this, and the reason this is important, because this goes across all spectrums, just beyond the abortion issue, but also in healthcare and education, and everything is a right. So it's important to know that a right is not just, there's a very big difference, we've talked about this, but there's a big difference between a right and a privilege, but just remember what a right is. It's something inherent in you. It's something that God gave you. It's something that can't be taken away, but you can forfeit a right. We'll get to that in a minute. So like I said, the abortion argument of the day is about rights. And so basically, and these are most legal questions, what do we do when two rights meet? When do rights end? And who has superior rights? So a question on this, so it's like you talked about the amendments. So let's talk about the First Amendment. Or let's just talk about basic rights. Does everyone agree that you have a right to property? Does everyone agree you have the right to speech? Do you have the right to go speak on somebody else's property? No. Well, I thought we had a right to. You have a right to both. So does anyone have an idea when a right ends, or when you give one up? You have a right to life. Does that mean that you can't? Does that mean that the death penalty is illegal?
When the right of the other is objected.
Do what now?
When the right of the other is objected, your right ends.
What do you mean by objected, sorry?
When you affect the right of the other person, or when you...
You're right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A great way that I like to think about it is your rights end when another person's begin. And so you have a right to property, and I have a right to speech. The moment I enter onto your property is when my right to speech ends. If you decide that I can't speak. I think it's pretty easy. You have a right to life, another person's right to life, but if I go take someone's, so basically let's say property, you have a right to property, I have a right to property. If I damage your property, then you have the right to take my property to repair your property. You know what I'm saying? So that's how you give up a right, is when you actually take somebody else's rights away. Is everybody following so far? Okay. So, now, I think this is important to talk about the Roe v. Wade case, because everyone hears Roe v. Wade, and then you ask them, well, what was Roe v. Wade about? They have no idea. What was even the holding of Roe v. Wade? Well, the whole idea, and the really modern law comes down to this idea of balancing rights. Now, that is incorrect, but that's modern legal theory, is that you got two rights, and we got to balance to see which one's more important. But as we just established, the proper way, and this is the thing to think about, your rights end when another person's begin. It's not a balance. My balancing says, well, his right to speech is more important than his right to property, so he can go speak on his property. Or his right to property is more important than my right to property, so he can come take my property, etc. So balancing of rights is very, very wrong. And anytime you start hearing of a judge or someone say something along the lines of balancing, it should just be a giant red flag. So Roe v. Wade was all about balancing. So then Roe v. Wade, they recognized that a woman has a right to privacy. And we all, while it's not necessary, it's not in the Constitution, we all sit there and we kind of recognize that there is a right to privacy. I have a right to be left alone in my own property. I have a right to not be spied on, etc. Now, I think the right to privacy that they did is completely made up, but that's another argument. But the court recognized that women have a right to bodily autonomy, and they have a right to privacy. But they also recognize in Roe v. Wade that unborn babies have rights. Now, the interesting thing about Roe v. Wade is they sat there and said, well, the baby has a right and the woman has a right, but the woman's right is more important than the baby's right, so therefore the woman can have an abortion. It's basically the holding in Roe v. Wade. Now, but beyond that, they set this thing called the trimester test. So in the first trimester, the baby isn't as valuable, so because it's so small, so you can do whatever you can abort for any reason. A state government cannot restrict it. In the second trimester, well, the baby's a little bit more important, so the government can restrict some abortions in the second trimester, kinda. And in the third trimester, well, the baby could survive outside the mother's womb, so the state government can come in and restrict all abortions in the third trimester, except for the case of the life of the mother. So they sat there, you've seen kind of how they're doing this balancing. They're sitting there saying, well, the first trimester is not important compared to the bodily, the privacy and the autonomy of the mom. So we're kind of seeing why this can be dangerous, or how they kind of thought of that. So now get into the bodily autonomy. Now this is where this whole argument kind of starts to begin with, well, I don't want to, it's legal, the woman has a right to her own body, she has a right to choose, etc. So this is that balancing right. So they sit there and they say, okay, yeah, the baby is a human being, but a woman has a right to her own body. The baby is a human being, but I have the right to refuse to use my body as a holding tank for a baby. The baby just can't feed off of me. So when it comes to, so my thing is, when it comes to this in particular, start out just really probing to see whether or not they really believe this. If it's my body and I can do whatever I want with it, do they really believe in bodily autonomy? And your simple questions you can start asking. So someone says, well, I have a right to do whatever I want with my own body. Well, do you have a right to take your body and get in a car and drive 90 miles per hour down the speedway with an open beer bottle? No. Well, okay, so that we can't do that with our body. Well, let's keep it just to pregnant women. What if a pregnant woman is in her first trimester and she knows she's pregnant, but she doesn't care. She wants to go and get drunk every night, and she wants to do cocaine. Does she, and let's say cocaine's legal. Does she have the right to do that? Everyone's going to say no, because that would deform the baby. Well, why not? I thought she said she has bodily autonomy and she can do whatever she wants with it. Well, we started to sit there and we start going, well, it bothers me that we're going to deform a baby for her to be able to do what she wants to do with her own body. So we're kind of starting to see, well, this whole bodily autonomy argument it really kind of starts falling apart when you're actually applying it to things that people are uncomfortable with, which is deformed babies. They're comfortable with chopping a baby up, they're just not comfortable with the deformed baby. Or just talk about, and the thing is, when they start talking, you talk about the legal side of this, there's already precedent for this. If you get pregnant, go to your doctor's office and ask for Accutane because you have acne. And your doctor's going to say, well, are you pregnant? And you're going to say, yes, I am. And they're going to say, well, I can't give you that. And you're going to say, no, you can. I have the right to do whatever I want with my own body, and you're a medical physician, and you can obviously do whatever, even if it does whatever to the baby. They're going to say, no, under law, I cannot do something that's going to deform the baby. But then, so you would sit there and you go, well, crap, there's this legal thing that protects the first trimester baby from being deformed. You can then get up, walk to the next doctor's office over, that's an abortionist, and say, hi, I would like you to go in and dump acid on my baby. And he'd say, okay, yeah, I can do that. Does that make any sense legally when you're talking about the balancing of rights? When you're talking about whether or not abortion should remain legal, is that legally consistent? It's not. And that's the big deal about this whole balancing of rights deal, it all falls apart, because in the end it's this balance of we don't want kids and we want sex without consequences, and that's our balance. We sit there and say that's top priority over the life of an unborn child, but we do sit here and we start saying, okay, well actually we don't want deformed kids because they're a burden on the state, so the right to the mom at this point is balanced. This is how that balancing argument works, and it can end up where we don't like deformed people, but we do like dead people. And that's why balancing is so terrifying, because you're allowing people to decide what's okay and what's not based on their own self-interest. And when it affects other people. And then obviously the right to refuse, they'll use that argument as well, and that's the famous violinist argument, which is Angelo comes and knocks Michael out because Ty has a kidney failure. And so then Angelo takes Michael and ties him up to Ty, and they have a pump there, and so now Michael is pumping Ty's blood through his own can Michael refuse to use his own kidney to pump Ty's blood, or he'll die from liver disease or kidney disease or something? And everyone would go, yeah, you have the right to refuse. And they say, well, that's just like pregnancy, because the mother is using her body to keep the baby alive, and she has the right to not use her body to keep someone else alive, just as Michael doesn't have the right to keep, or has the right to refuse Ty. Well, in law, there is a right to refuse to help somebody. If you are walking down the street and somebody is getting attacked by a bear, you do not have to go over there and put your life in danger to go save somebody. However, in law, there is a legal right for a parent to not neglect a child, or you can't not feed your kid because you just don't feel like feeding your kid. You have to provide basic food and shelter until somebody else can come along. And the same thing with pregnancy, is that you have the right, you have the legal obligation and the moral obligation to provide basic care, housing, with the baby live in your stomach for a short period of time, until the baby can be born and given to somebody else that can take care of it. Make sense? Is there any, so those two arguments, my body, I can do what I want, the right to refuse. Does anybody have any questions on those two? Because those are huge right now, and especially as far as like what Shannon's concerned with, or with Shannon's question, which was the whole legal aspect of this. No? Okay, cool. The other thing that I like when people talk about, well, it should be legal, and they decided in Roe v. Wade, so it's over, is the Supreme Court has a long history of being absolutely dead wrong. Usually not usually they're wrong, but half the time they're really wrong a lot of the time. And so I've highlighted a couple of really big decisions for your well, it's legal, the court's decided it, there's nothing we can do. In 1957, the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott case decided that African Americans are not citizens. In the, and I didn't put this up, in the Fugitive Slave Act, they decided that northern states didn't have a right to protect slaves from southern states, and they had to send them back to go into slavery. The Supreme Court in Buck v. Bell said that the government can come in and sterilize you, and because if your IQ's not high enough. And the Supreme Court, by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who's a famous eugenicist, said 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. In the case of Korematsu versus the United States government decided that they could put Japanese into internment camps for no other reason than that they're Japanese. In Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court upheld segregation. In Kayla versus the City of New London, the government can take, basically the case was that the government came and took, Angelo had private property and Ty had private property, and the government said that Ty's property is more valuable and he wants Angelo's property, so I'm the government, I'm going to go take Angelo's and give it to Ty because I'm the government, can do it. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, no, the government can do that. So, and then you can read the rest of these. The Supreme Court has a long history of and there's a ton of these. I just put not even top 10. These are just 10 that I really just drive me insane. So as far as the government and it's a law, and this is it, the Supreme Court has a long history of being absolutely wrong. And just because something is a law does not mean that it's good or that it should remain a law. And really, Roe v. Wade, abortion is not a law. It's just a Supreme Court holding. Point being is that Roe v. Wade falls on this list. And in all of these cases, and let's say the private property case, that was the Supreme Court using the balancing test, saying, well, Ty has a more valuable economic business than Angelo does, so we value economic growth, so we're going to have Ty have his property because Ty will get more out of the land than Angelo will himself. And that's in all of these cases, and it just, so you start recognizing there's this pattern of balancing that is insane, and that's what they used in Roe v. Wade, and again in Planned Parenthood v. Casey a little bit later. And then the other thing about the ignorance of this whole law argument is look at Oklahoma's homicide law in itself. So homicide is the killing of one human being by another. And then section B, as used in this section, human being includes an unborn child. Homicide shall not include acts in which an unborn child are committed during illegal abortion. So in our own laws, in every state's law, they'll have a homicide law that says killing another human being is wrong. An unborn is a human being. but if a doctor does it in the act of abortion, it's okay. How does that make any sense? So if you're driving down the street and you are pregnant, and a woman is driving down the street and she is pregnant and she gets hit by a drunk driver, he will be charged with, and the baby dies, he will be charged with homicide and go to jail forever. Now, if she's able to make her left turn into the Planned Parenthood clinic and walk in, and the doctor is the one that kills the baby, she's out $300 and everyone's fine. How the heck does that make any sense at all? It doesn't. But it does in the Supreme Court, because they sat there and said, well, there's this balance. We don't want, if someone wants the baby, then it's valuable, and we want to protect the baby's life from people being able to go kill, punch pregnant women in the stomach and kill babies. That's higher value, but we do want to have the woman's right to choose still. So balance, balance, balance. This is okay, this isn't, even though it doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. And then this is another one that's basically just exempting doctors on that list. So, does anybody have any questions on the legal stuff?
And again, the reason we were harping on this so much, because Josh and I were like, okay, what part of this topic are we going to tackle tonight? And the thing is that we are pretty active in this argument on a daily basis or on a regular basis, and we're seeing a shift between those arguments that we heard a long time ago, and now it's turning into legality. And the main reason that this is happening is because we have a society that is getting more and more befuddled when it comes to morality, because they've taken God out and they don't know how to grasp onto what's moral, what's not, where do we draw the line, so they automatically turn to the legal aspect. And that's why we're harping on about this, because that's the only thing that they will recognize we all have in common. They won't recognize common morality, but they will recognize common legality. So that's why it's good to bring up these inconsistencies and say, okay, well, because they'll say, hey, Roe v. Wade already happened, you've lost, move on. You will actually hear that if you start engaging these conversations. So then if you can bring up, well, let's talk about the law, and you can bring up the inconsistencies and then say, why does this bother you? Why does this not add up? Then we can take it back to a moral argument, back to what is the unborn, and actually have the real discussion. So that's why we're harping on with this so much.
Yeah. Now, do you feel like your question was answered pretty well?
The question that was asked by Michael and Shane and both was, how do you talk to someone who says that they are a Christian, says that life begins at conception, but that it is still okay or should still be legal? So that's why we were talking about this.
Yeah.
So one of my friends had an interesting thought he gave me once, and it was that illegal abortions cause infections versus the sterile procedures they do in abortion clinics.
Sure.
He was talking about the death rate on the women.
Sure.
So I mean, that's an argument I get a lot when it gets brought up.
Sure.
So I'm just curious how you would address that.
So here's the deal. You just apply that to anything else. You just sit there and say, oh, hey, we spend a lot of money. We put a lot of police officers' lives in danger when it comes to combating, bank robberies, and we have to, there's gunfire and people are caught in the crosshairs of these armed robbery situations, especially so let's just make robbery legal. Okay, and so you can come in, and that way the police don't have to show up. You can just walk in, and we're gonna have a lot less casualties in armed robberies. But the thing is just like when something, you got to recognize that, especially in this case, it doesn't make sense to legalize everything just because it'll make it a little bit more safe. Part of the reason that you want something unsafe to do is it's a deterrent, and so recognizing that And the other thing is just like not balancing, but just recognizing in the case of abortion is that it's unsafe to have a back alley abortion that can cause infection, but when you have the legal abortions, you're having 4,000 dead babies a day, so you're having 4,000 murders. If we can cut that down, and maybe, we do have more infections from people that go get illegal abortions, but let's say we cut abortion down by 3,000 babies a day. I mean,
and my thing too, and because I'm a woman approaching this, it might be a little different. I don't know that I would recommend a man bringing this into a conversation because of today's society, although you have every right to say it, but whatever. I always just say I give women more credit than that. I don't think that just because we make it illegal, all of a sudden women are going to go around hurting themselves, right? I sit there, because a lot of the statistics from back in the day where that argument comes from were completely fabricated and have been proven false.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're not gonna jump into that, but I can add it to the Google Doc later. But I just say, listen, I give women more credit than that. I don't think that they're gonna go around hurting themselves just because, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I just really got involved. There's something really good we want to get to. But that's what I would say. As I wouldn't bring that up as a man because you're a white man, quit telling me what women think. But as a woman, I do say.
But it was a friend of his that asked him.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Was it a guy or?
It was a chick, actually. We had an argument about it. I got slapped. It was great.
Yeah, that's definitely, and we can talk more about approach later, but you definitely want to try, okay, we really got to move on to something. We'll get other questions later, but we have to move on.
We'll hit at the drainage hub.
I want to say, when I was the age of all of you here in college, what's called back alley abortions today were still performed by doctors then.
Yeah.
But it was illegal, so it really wasn't back alley,
Yeah.
it was just a secret clinic that you went to. That's
Exactly.
what it was. And so why was that any more dangerous than what they are today? And the truth is, there are tremendous numbers of complications in abortuaries today.
Yeah.
So that's a whole bogus thing
Yeah.
about back alley abortions being more dangerous, because that's still performed by a doctor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Back there
and
in
so we'll
clinic.
add that into the thing, but we really got to get to this. So overnight, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but all of a sudden some guy on Twitter went on this rant, and it's gone viral, of the best new pro-abortion argument. Have any of you seen this or heard of it, other than the people who were talking to Josh like earlier? Okay, so this guy, he writes sci-fi novels, he's not successful, he wanted attention. He comes up with this scenario, and this is, okay, I thought this is a rephrasing of the scenario, but it's exactly the same, nothing's been altered in terms of the actual facts. What are you doing?
I don't know what happened. I don't know.
Okay, so I took the rephrasing from a Matt Walsh article that he wrote.
We're gonna get there. I'm sorry.
What are the actual words?
I know.
Okay, so I'm just gonna tell you because we're already running short on time because Josh talked forever.
I know. I'm sorry.
I don't know that we have any time restraints tonight. I think we can just keep going.
Yeah, but we wanna
Yep.
provide adequate time. Okay, so the argument is that you're in a fertility clinic and they're in one room and it's on fire, and in one room is a 5-year-old screaming child, and in another room is this like pink, what does it say? Okay, you're in a fertility clinic, suddenly a fire breaks out. The building begins to quickly burn down, and as you're about to make a run for your life, you hear crying in another room. You open the door and there's a 5-year-old child standing in the frozen storage unit of this facility. You also notice the other side of the room, a big box marked 1,000 viable human embryos. Do fertility, okay, so this is his own little thing that he's adding in there. Do fertility clinics really keep human embryos in boxes labeled viable human embryos? No, but whatever. You have to choose between saving the 5-year-old or saving the box of embryos. You can only choose one. Which do you choose? So this has been promoted as the best pro-abortion argument. You're going to shut down all the pro-lifers. Overnight, this went viral. People were retweeting it. It's been brought up on news channels. So this is what we wanted to spend a bulk of time on, because all of a sudden this is like
the new argument. Again, it's kind of that balancing
and it's
deal.
everywhere. So we wanted to ask you, how do you respond to this scenario? If someone brought this up to you and said, hey, I saw this on Twitter, you say you're pro-life, let me tell you why you're wrong, and they bring this up, how do you respond? Open floor.
Yeah.
So does the case of 1,000 viable embryos, does it weigh more than a 5-year-old? That's what I want to know.
That's what I was thinking.
How big is this? How big is both of you?
Like, I could probably get both, I feel like. That's my logic.
Yeah.
5-year-olds can walk.
Yeah, I mean like...
Okay, well, we'll start with this. Which one would you guys choose? Who would choose the 5-year-old?
I would do both.
You can't only choose one. That's the thing about brain. That's the thing about thought experiments. You can only choose one. Not the logic behind it. Which one will you choose?
What kind of frozen storage unit is this?
You can't ask questions, that's the thing.
Okay.
Because like, wouldn't
You
it?
can't ask questions, you have to make Airbnb.
That's
the 5 years.
also a
Oh,
political
dang
problem nowadays. Too many questions are asked.
Yeah. So who chooses the 5-year-old? Raise your hand again. Who chooses the 1,000 embryos?
Who just runs on their own?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what
Yeah. Now, so then the question is, so then the guy goes on basically in his little Twitter tirade, and again, this is like 500,000 retweets. It is like picked up to make sure.
This is everywhere.
The big thing is, go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, doesn't having an abortion put the mother in more danger than just having the baby?
Yeah, but yeah.
So,
Well,
like, what is this?
so the question is
Oh, I
this.
see. Okay, hold on to that thought because we're gonna. I
Yeah.
understand where you're going
Okay.
with that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah. So basically, the big deal is this: is that basically the author of this question ends it with this: everybody knows that a 5-year-old is more valuable than an embryo, even 1,000 embryos. It's time the pro-life
He
community.
says everyone would pick the 5-year-old.
Everyone picked the 5-year-old.
Because they know.
Because they know that a 5-year-old is more valuable than an embryo.
That's important.
And even when it comes to 1,000 embryos, or if it was 1,000,000 embryos, everyone's going to choose one 5-year-old. So the pro-life community needs to quit harping on life begins at conception because they don't really mean it. Because if they did, they would choose 1,000 lives over one life. Is that persuasive?
I think they're using an emotional argument though, so I mean, they also have the 5-year-old is, I thought it's screaming, never mind, but like, yeah.
It is.
If you're crying, well, they just said, oh yeah, and there's a thing of embryos, so what they're really using is is it the pathos? Is that the emotional argument? They're using an emotional argument, so I mean, the fact is, and you can't think rationally and emotionally, and that's usually what the left does do, is an emotional argument. And I also think the thing is, when you think of an embryo, you think of something that's already dead, versus, or at least I do, like, when I hear embryo
Well,
outside the womb.
this is fertilized.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
They're just
So this
frozen.
this is
But they still have to have.
sperm and egg have already come together. This is what we would. This is a human embryo that we would consider a human life. Anyways, okay, so we've got one for. Sorry, you leave. I'll get this.
What's the right answer?
Who else has other thoughts?
Isn't it practically clothing? In a sense. If you have them in a box. Like these embryos come from. Yeah, why would they be in a box? This is.
It's like I say, it's like don't get into the semantics of like whether or not this actually would happen because it's not.
So,
going to
yeah,
actually
so
happen.
here's the thing. The whole point of this scenario and the whole point of a lot of thought experiments is to get you wrestling over really minor details to the point that you forget what the overall argument is and the fact that it's a false analogy, right? So let's start square one, and we're going to get into some logical fallacies of this particular argument, but square one, it's a false analogy when you're talking about abortion because there's a very big difference between I cannot save everyone in a burning building and being the one to light the building on fire. Right? So already we're talking about a false analogy that's not a fair comparison. Okay, so I have put a link in the Google Doc that we'll send out to anyone who wants it of a list of all the like major logical fallacies. If you don't know the top 5 or whatever, you're going to really struggle, not just in the pro-life discussion, but in any apologetics discussion. If you cannot recognize when someone is making a false analogy, when they're using a straw man argument, then you are going to end up down rabbit trails and arguing things that do not even matter because they're just not a good analogy. So first of all is that it is an appeal to emotion, which is a logical fallacy. When you're asking someone to make a logical decision, but you're phrasing it in an emotional way to where it assumes that if you make the wrong emotional decision, therefore your logic is defunct. Right? Does that make sense? Are we following? I'm getting a lot of blank stares, so I'm not. But it's attempting to manipulate an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument. And I don't know if this falls under appeal to emotion. This might be more of like a straw man. But it's basically, you know, like when you say, well, you're not for abortion, so you're against women's rights. Okay, that's not the argument at all. You've built up a false argument and then torn it down. And that's what straw man is when you build something up that is not my argument, but it makes it easier to refute, so then it makes me seem like I'm stupid, which is not at all the case because you built up a false argument. Okay, and this is something that kind of, straw man usually is in conjunction with another logical fallacy. So in this one, it's a straw man of you're building up a false analogy, you're not even talking about what the pro-life stance is, right? And then you're tearing it down by making an emotional appeal. And also, another logical fallacy is a loaded question. I think Ben Shapiro put it as you're creating like a binary paradigm if you've got like two options only. So it's like if I go up to Aubrey and I say, Aubrey, have you quit beating your dog yet? Is there a right answer to that? No, I haven't stopped beating my dog, or yes, I have. Either way, you're admitting to beating your dog, right? So it's that loaded question. If there's an assumption built in there that you may not even fully recognize right away, but it's there. So that one, obviously, it's pretty obvious, right? But in this case, there is no right answer, because if you pick the 5-year-old, well, great, you're not a true pro-life because you just let all those embryos die. If you pick the embryos, well, you're a horrible person because you just let this 5-year-old die, right? You set up a paradigm where there are only two options, and it's false anyway because it's not a fair comparison. Are we all following? Did I lose anyone along that? Because I know we did go pretty fast. But those are, and you could go through all of the logical fallacies, and a lot of them kind of overlap, and it's kind of like nitpicking, but it's easier to identify when you put a name to it. Was that kind of where you were headed as well? Or was your question a little bit different?
No, I think my question was a little bit different. I didn't. I honestly don't understand like what he's trying to say with that, because he's saying that both are in danger. So what I was saying is that the mother's going to be in more danger if she has the abortion rather than just having the child, unless I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Unless the child is actually putting her in
Ultimately,
danger.
it is, and if you look at the like comment thread of the like Twitter feed or whatever, and I mean I don't have Twitter, but you guys can all do that at your own discretion. But either way you choose, the guy who even put it out there is tearing apart both arguments. So I mean, it is set up to be a lose-lose situation. Have any of you guys seen the Star Trek movies? This is a little with like the where there's like the Carter body Maru simulation, whatever, and Captain Kirk, in order for him to actually win the scenario, he has to go and completely reprogram the computer. It's exactly the same thing. So if you're talking to a nerd and you hear this scenario, you just bring that up and be like, you have to rewire the computer to even talk about this because it's a false analogy. It's a lose-lose situation. Sorry, it was a nerd reference. But.
Yes. So the other thing, and Ty started to do this, and this is something that you also do with like the, if you ever hear the violinist argument or anything like that, is whenever someone trots out an example, well, immediately start distinguishing and say, well, is that really like pregnancy? So as Ty started to point out, is that really like a woman giving birth? Because in the abortion, her life's in danger too, and in this, it's not. So what's the biggest thing what's the biggest difference between saving a 5-year-old from a burning building versus an abortion? Like, why is this not like abortion in your all's opinion? Why does this fall apart? Like, there's one really big glaring one that I want to just talk about in this. And so, anyway, did anybody catch it?
I'm going to quote Kayla. There's a difference between choosing between saving a 5-year-old and the embryos from the burning building, and you can't save everyone, and setting fire to the building.
Exactly. Yeah, Joseph hit it right on the head. There is a huge difference between leaving someone in a burning building because you cannot save them and then killing someone outright. That is not even on the same moral playing field. It is morally permissible to commit a good act, saving a child, which may indirectly lead to something bad, the embryo's burning. It is not morally permissible to actively kill an innocent human being. It is not okay for you to be sitting there in the burning building, to grab the 5-year-old and then go kick the embryos into the fire. You know what I'm saying? Like, there is a huge difference between the act of abortion, which is actively ending the life of the unborn, versus saving someone's life and not being able to save another person's life.
And well, one question I had earlier when you were talking about the legal aspect, what was you have the legal right, you don't have to endanger yourself.
Yeah.
So honestly, even if you choose one or the other, I mean, you're doing something you don't even have to do. So I mean, if you're trying to say, if you choose one, you're bad, if you choose this one, you're bad, well, no, you're actually sacrificing your life to save people we don't know.
Legally speaking.
Yeah,
legally. So like, I guess legally, but I guess, yeah, never mind.
No, yeah, and that's the share. Legally, what you're saying, you could run out of the building and not save either. And be,
I mean, yeah, I like his idea. Third option, save yourself.
Save
All for that.
That was one of my question. The obvious question to me is, what's a 5-year-old doing in an abortion clinic?
That's
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing about thought experiments and Josh is going to talk more about like other thought experiments that are brought into this. But the whole point of a thought experiment is that it is so out there and so crazy that essentially it's trying to get you to examine what underlying values you have. But a lot of these thought experiments are not even set up fairly, and that's why you have to sit there and say, hey, yes, there's a place for thought experiments, but there's a place when we need to actually sit and say, what are you arguing? And what is the comparison that you're drawing? And that's why it's so important to know and to understand what a logical fallacy is and how to go in and identify those. To take, Josh and I were talking the other day, to take a helicopter view and say, what is this person actually trying to communicate to me? As opposed to getting so caught up in it that you forget what you're actually talking about. And that's why you do ask questions. I mean, that's basic apologetics rule, especially important here. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? Why are you even bringing this situation up? Why are you even bringing this thought? Where did you find this thought experiment? Did you make this up, right? All of those questions are fair. And anyway,
Yeah.
incorrect. Sorry.
So the other thing that's important in this thing, we're good, is the intrinsic value element of this. Because the asker of the question presupposes something when you make your choice, which is when you choose the 5-year-old, you're inherently saying that the embryos are less valuable. But here's the thing that we believe that's really important, is that every human being is born with, or is created with intrinsic value. Just as we were talking about rights earlier, you have intrinsic value. Now, does anybody know, have a definition for intrinsic value? Okay. Well,
it is a value based on the substance of whatever has the value.
Exactly.
It's a value based on its nature.
Yeah. No, exactly right, Joseph.
There was a lady, she did an example of like intrinsic value. It's value based on the maker. Your value is based off what the maker makes you valuable. Like, so like you get a $100 bill and you had an old wrinkled up one and you decide, well, I don't want this anymore, it's not valuable to me. It's still valuable to the US government because they made it, even though it's not valuable to you.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. So, yeah, it's exactly both of those. So intrinsic human value is belonging to a thing by its very nature. If human beings have intrinsic value at all, this is really important, then they must have it from the first moment that they exist as a distinct entity. If they do not have value, or their value is less, then their value is not intrinsic and it never will be. So basically, if you are not created the moment that you are a human embryo, if you do not have human value, intrinsic value, then you have the opposite, which is extrinsic value, which means that external factors, let me get to that on the next one, external factors determine your value. So remember our whole balancing thing, bringing it all back. You have the value that the court places on you. You have the value that your mother, whether or not she wants you or not, places on you. And if you're not born, if you're not created with intrinsic value, then for the rest of your life, you never get intrinsic value. Like as they both said, it's the maker, God himself, that gives you intrinsic value. It is a part of your very being, just like your rights are. So when people take away intrinsic value, then they can rationalize doing anything to you. They can rationalize, Hitler can rationalize murdering a Jew because a Jew doesn't have intrinsic value. We can rationalize slavery because slaves don't have intrinsic value. We can rationalize killing 4,000 babies a day because they don't have intrinsic value. We can rationalize not giving older people health care because there's no intrinsic value. It's all extrinsic. What does society say that your value is? That's an incredibly dangerous place to be. So when you're talking about this in itself, recognize the importance of intrinsic value. Why is that important to this? Because the thought experiment guy tries to sit there and say, well, just because you picked the 5-year-old, that means that they don't have value or their value is less. And as we said, just because
you go on to the next thing because that's what you'll talk about.
Yeah. So these hypotheticals, just because you pick one over the other doesn't mean that one doesn't have intrinsic value. The embryos still have intrinsic value, and the easiest way to do this is run hypotheticals back at them. So you can run the hypotheticals of, well, do you save the embryos or save the life of, which one, you're running out of a burning building, Mr. Guy that has to ask you the hypothetical. You can either save the embryos or you can save a woman who's sitting there that's going to get burned alive, but she's going to die of cancer next week. Who do you save? You know that she's going to die. I mean, saving her is just postponing it by a week. What if she's going to die tomorrow? Do you save her or the embryos? Well, you're probably going to save the embryos. Does that mean that she doesn't have value? A fully grown human being? A 5-year-old child or one embryo that is yours and it's your only hope of having an actual child. So let's say that you're sterile, but you have one embryo that worked.
Having a child is genetically yours.
Genetically yours.
Either way is me an actual child.
Yeah, actual child. So yeah, sorry, it's a child that is genetically yours. Sorry about that, the Freudian slip. No, just kidding. But no, you have the child that's actually yours. Do you save the embryo or do you save the 5-year-old? Well, if it's your only hope of having a child of your own, you might just pick the embryo over the 5-year-old because it's yours. What about a 5-year-old or 100 adults? I'm probably picking the 5-year-old. What if as far as like Dave and Charlie, when you have like kids or family, it's like you're picking your family over 1 million people. It can be Dave, it can be Jocelyn, and Dave is going to pick Jocelyn over 100 random people in a room. And then you can throw out other thought experiences because you can change it on them. And then you want to make this more active killing. Well, let's say you have 5, you see the meme all the time with the 5 people in one train track and one, which lever do you pull? You save the 5 or save the 1. Well, this is another one. So let's say you have 5 people on a train track and you have, you're standing on above it and you can throw one woman in front of the train and save 5 people. Do you throw the woman in front of the train to save the 5? Most people are going to say no because they instinctively know there's something different between when you're pulling a lever, between the train's going to hit somebody versus when you're actively killing somebody to save somebody else. People really have a hard time with that. So throw hypotheticals back their way because in the end they start recognizing, well, crap, this hypothetical kind of sucks to begin with, and this whole picking thing really doesn't determine whether or not someone has intrinsic value or they have value or etc. So,
and it's also the thing of this original scenario that we brought up. It's kind of the way that his conclusions work, as in, oh, okay, well, if you pick the 5-year-old, you're not a real pro-lifer, and if you pick the embryos, then you're a horrible human being. It's the same as like if they say I'm sitting here and I can either save a white man or a black woman. Well, let's say that the white man is Josh and I know him and I don't know the black woman, and instinctively I just say, okay, I'm going to save Josh because extrinsically he has more value to me, right? Because I know him. Well, okay, then you're a racist. No, I just knew that person, or that was an emotional response that I had to make in a snap decision based on this faulty scenario, and all of a sudden you're drawing the conclusion that I'm racist, right? So it's the same thing. Again, let's look at what was your point A and your point C, and what was the B that got you there, and does it all really line up and make sense?
Yeah. And the reason, like I said, we brought that up, and that wasn't a question, but this is the thing, is like, you can kind of see the desperation, and they're kind of throwing out all these, but this is one of the new art, and the thing about the other side is it changes all the time. So we're giving you the cutting edge preparation for, because I'm sure that they are going to have your gender studies professors or your pro-abort professors that be prepping their kids or their students with these kind of thought processes, just like the violinist argument was famous in the 70s. This, I'm sure, is going to start picking up steam and becoming famous because they think that it's awesome. So be prepared to handle it. So we're going to close up. Questions, answers, because we covered a lot. And we try to keep it pretty narrow, actually only like 2 topics, but even those 2 topics are in depth, and we kind of just glazed the surface. So do you guys have any questions as far as like...
And we recognize too that Josh and I spend a lot of time in this because it's what we're surrounded by and approached by. So we may say something with the assumption that you knew how we got there, because it's kind of that like groupthink mentality. I texted Josh the other day, I said, I agree with everything we're saying. So if there was something that didn't quite add up or we skipped a step somewhere in there, please let us know, because we want you to be ready to talk about this. And a lot of this does come, like I said, it's trial through failure. You don't get it on the first time. The first time that I went out on a college campus and was talking about this, I was a sophomore in high school for a pro-life outreach, and I failed miserably, and I felt emotionally exhausted at the end of the day, and I felt like I didn't know any of this, right? So I went and studied, and I did it again and again and again and again, and now I feel very confident going into it. And that's what it takes. It takes self-study, and it takes practice. And the great thing, I know that I'm harping on, and this is supposed to be Q&A. Think about your question while I'm harping on. But the big reason that we were bringing this up is because it is very new. I forgot what the other point I was going to make was. It's very important. Oh, to leave a bit of hope, though, we had people responding to this with great articles and great videos the next day. So we do have this kind of like, yes, I guess what I'm saying is we've given apologetics a platform, and that is something that we have great hope for. Because if this had happened 5-10 years ago, it would have been weeks or months before we heard a consistent argument, right? I mean, because everyone kind of had their own different approach at first. And then we kind of sat here and puzzled through it, I'm sure when we first heard it too. And then we heard the really concise arguments. We're like, okay, yeah, that's such a better way of saying that. Now that apologetics has a platform, we can get these answers out much quicker, which is a really good sign. Now the church is still struggling in terms of actually getting it out and engaging, but our, I guess like our, what am I trying to say?
Our equipping of people to like not
Yes.
fall to it is good. Now it's time to take it to them to convince them to come to our side. So we're just kind of like, we've got the wall up and we're sort of like, oh, you're not coming into our territory, but we're having a harder time doing it.
But take heart in the fact that we responded very quickly, and it does show us that apologetics has a great platform now. We just need to use it.
Yeah. So anyways, questions?
Yes.
Okay, so you said earlier about your rights end when another person's begin, right? Well, how do you talk about that if the mother has a right to life and the baby has a right to life, but what if the baby's right to life infringes on the mother's right to life?
It's a great question.
How do you balance, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. Okay, so, and that's a really great question, and I'll tell you how the pro-life community, how we handle that is, that's the choice of the person that has the control in that situation, being the mother. Because at that point, all things are equal. And that becomes, you have some moms that will sit there and they will go, I don't care. Like, for example, usually what happens is it's a cancer scenario where mom has cancer and the only way to treat it is chemo, but chemo's going to kill the baby. But if they go ahead and give chemo, then she'll probably survive cancer. But a lot of times the mom's going to say, no, I'm not going to have chemo. And then she'll have the baby and die of cancer afterwards. It is horribly, horribly sad. So that's a personal question for the person themselves, because at that point, that there is no legal remedy, and there is no, I wouldn't even say there's a moral. I mean that maybe there's a moral obligation, but that's more of a self-determination.
Yeah.
Let me weigh in on that if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
What would you do?
What would I do?
Yeah.
I'm a man. I don't
Let
have
it be your wife.
Whoa! A sexist.
Dude, I only ask the questions, right?
Well,
No, I would say, listen, I would try to reason. Did this lady get pregnant intending to deliver the baby? Yes.
oh, that's a question. Oh,
Yes.
I would say.
I don't know that there's many, well, I shouldn't say it.
Let's say that they weren't.
Say that they weren't what? Intending to deliver the baby? They just wanted to get pregnant, have an abortion, and just keep doing
No,
that?
they probably weren't even planning on
Well, let's
it.
say, like, I think he's saying, like, let's say the case of rape, that she had
Sure.
cancer, got raped, and so she wasn't planning on it. So now she's got,
Not cancer.
or
It's not cancer. It's like if she delivers the baby, she will die from delivering the baby.
We don't know that for sure. That's the answer.
You have to.
You don't know she's gonna die from having a baby because there's an almighty God that has control over that whole situation.
Here's the thing that I'd like to point out, in that, again, that's kind of another thought experiment in some aspects. The difference being that that actually does happen. The problem is that it's very, very, very rare. It is such a small percentage, because the only times when the death of the mother is insured, statistically speaking, is like an ectopic pregnancy, right? In which case, I don't think we've had a single case of a mother and child surviving that, right? So I understand where you're coming from, and that you're kind of maybe struggling with that. It's a very small, or you're kind of like, wait, I see a
Someone
woman.
will bring that up.
Right.
And they will
What
say,
I
like,
always say is, hey, I understand. And at that point, I'm going to say, do we lose both or save one? Not that it gives any more value to either of them. Both are still equally valued, right? Equally valuable. But my thought is, I say, yes, I understand where you're coming from, but it's such a small percentage, and it's not even really a part of the abortion argument. right? It is a little bit, but it's kind of on the, not what a majority of what we're talking about is, right? It's not a majority of the cases. And I would also like to throw in there, I know you said like, oh, I'm a man. This is not a woman's issue, okay? This is a human rights issue, and as a man, you have every right to stand up for this. At no point in this did we start bringing in some Bible-thumping argument, right? This is basic logic. It's scientific. We're not drowning people in holy water here. And as a man, you have every right. I, as a woman, am giving you permission, right?
Thank you, Kayla.
Yes, you're welcome to stand up for this and to get involved, okay? It doesn't have to be some emotional, you're a man, stay out of my body, whatever thing. Yes.
Yeah, so we don't just make this hypothetical, let's talk real life situations. At OPAC, we grill candidates on the abortion issue. And when Senator Coburn, or he wasn't senator at that time, but he was running for Senate, and he came to OPAC for our interview, one of the things that he said, you say one thing, but wait until you have a woman on a table in front of you and her vitals are going south, and you know you can take that baby, you can abort that baby and save that woman's life, or you can leave it alone, they'll both die. It's happened twice in 3,000 deliveries for him, where he took the baby so the woman could live. That's what you call to prevent the death of the mother, which many pro-life organizations make that one exception right there. And it's basically a tubal or, you know, a very difficult situation. But he says, you say you won't do something, but if you're really pro-life and you can save one of these, because that mother may have more children at home. A mother can have more children in the future. And so that's the decision.
And again, it's important to note you're not making a value claim.
Yeah.
So what question would you have for Charlie in that situation, with Dr. Coburn in that situation? What would the logical question be to that? Was there a consent by the mother before the delivery? Did they know that it was a tubal?
Yeah.
Was there a decision made beforehand? Right?
Yeah.
It's not just a logical question?
Yeah.
And in the case of a tubal pregnancy, based on where the pregnancy, the baby is growing outside of the womb, the baby's going to die regardless of whether you let the baby continue to grow. It will take the mother and the baby's life. So in that case, I don't know the technology if that's available to move the child back into the womb. I don't think that there is. So to my knowledge, the baby is going to die in a tubal pregnancy. So that baby has to be removed. It's terribly sad, but it happens, and it's rare.
Yeah. So I think summarizing all of that, which is one, as they first started talking about, like, you know, started asking the questions like, you know, what was the intent, and some there where their moral convictions lie, but then start pointing out how rare it really is, and when they're bringing that up, it's kind of they're just bringing that up just to bring it up because it really doesn't happen, and the way that happens, it's usually life of the mother usually means both. It's gonna save one or save one. So, questions, more questions on anything abortion related.
Does the question I would ask you guys, and anybody on the floor, does it benefit when you're having a dialogue with someone to reference if you know of a personal, if you know personally someone that has had an abortion? Is it beneficial to your argument or to the discussion to bring it, to make it as personal as possible?
I don't bring it into my side. The reason for that is because you can make it sound like one case should be the rule for everything, and that gets a little hazy. But if someone seems very passionately pro-choice and they seem to not be moving and they seem to be really visibly agitated, I always stop and say, hey, if you're comfortable in answering this question, have you or someone you know or love had an abortion? Because a lot of times they can't admit to themselves that they or someone they know or love has committed murder or allowed for murder to happen. And I have had times where I've asked that question and have had young women sitting across from me immediately break down in tears and say, I don't even know what just happened. I don't know what my friend did, I don't know what I did, I don't understand, and I just stop everything I'm doing. You don't continue in a logical argument when you have someone in front of you who is broken, right? That's when I sit and I say, if you want to tell me the story, if you haven't been able to talk to someone about it, talk to me. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to drown you in holy water. Just let it out. And if she needs to cry for 2 hours, I'm going to let her cry for 2 hours, right? Because there's a brokenness there. I say, hey, can I pray for you? Can I walk you through this? Can I talk to you about Crossroads Clinic, about a Hope Clinic, where you can get professional counseling, where you can move forward in this? I wrote an article when I was in high school for a woman who had 4 abortions when she was very young, and she talked about the healing process. And after talking to her and realizing how that led her to Christ, I handled this situation totally different, and it's important that you remember that too. So I don't bring it in and start talking about anything of, well, I know someone who had PTSD from an abortion, and so every woman does. A lot do. I'm not going to throw that out there and try to make that argument, because it's not important to what my actual argument is, right? I mean, because I talked about everything should come back to, is the unborn a human being? So I'm not going to bring it up because I'm not going to stray off topic, but if someone seems to really be agitated and really passionate, I just would say, hey, if you want to answer, and if that seems too personal, you don't want to answer that question, we can continue this conversation a different way, or we can call it a day. Here's my number. If you have questions, call me later, right? So that's always important. If you have someone in front of you that is broken, pump the brakes. Stop. You have a human being that you need to deal with first, right?
Good.
Yeah. Questions?
Bryce, don't ask any more questions.
I know.
No, that's fine.
They chewed me out last time.
No, that was it was a really
No.
good question. It's a really relevant question.
So the question I would have, we could go around, and we're not, we could go around and we could say, what are you comfortable with in the conversation right now? What would you be comfortable with? Ask yourself that.
What would you be comfortable talking about with somebody?
Yeah. I mean, do you feel proficient with the 10-second response? Do you feel proficient with the trot out the toddler, the biological argument?
And this is, I've said it again and again, but it's not something that you feel comfortable with until you've done it.
Yeah. So here's the next part of that whole question, and that is, whatever you feel comfortable with, begin to develop your repertoire, your rapport on where you're comfortable, and then just build it on both sides. And then start praying for opportunities to share.
Yeah.
Right?
And there will
Make
be.
yourself some cheat sheets and some notes. This isn't something that you just have it in the middle of the night and you're like, all of the information is in my brain and I can just whip it out. Like I look over my stuff to this day and keep refreshing myself and like, oh yeah, I remember that, what I use over there in the scriptures, and it's a constant refresher. So it's just building a skill.
And I would say this too on that, is recognize that the value that every single one of you all bring in so many different areas, whether or not it's working with kids, or whether or not it's law, or whether or not it's politics, or whether or not whatever it is, that everyone here brings something really valuable and important. When it comes to the pro-life issue, if you guys need to practice, or you want one-on-one, we do these trainings. We've done mass trainings, and we go out and we work. But if you want like more one-on-one stuff, if you want to practice some arguments, there are people in here that have been doing this for a long time, that have done professional training. I know Addie's done it. I know Kayla's done it. I know Dave's done it. I know there's people that have said, if you ever sit there like, hey, I'd really like to work on this argument, talk to somebody here and say, hey, Brother Dave, can I run in and can you play the pro-choice guy and I play pro-life guy and we run through this stuff? Or, Kayla's gonna have this Google Docs, you can start running through all this stuff. Like, literally reach out. If you wanna get better at this, start practicing, and practice on a friendly face. It's gonna help you grow. And then they're probably gonna encourage you to go out and do it on somebody that is actually pro-choice. And that's, again, when the growing starts. So if you need to start where you're comfortable, scrimmage, practice, and then go out and do the real thing. And that's how you grow.
There's a saying in ministry, never make a hospital visit alone. Always grab somebody and go to take with you on a hospital visit, because they're going to learn
Yeah.
how to be in a hospital room, how to pray over a patient, all that stuff. We're gonna learn that. Grab somebody and let's walk over to the campus and start engaging.
Yeah.
And if you I learned is having a partner is really, because when we went with JFA or with John, is you find someone who's kind of seasoned in this, and then you stand there and listen to them. You can learn a lot from listening to somebody. And the Holy Spirit, the thing is, this is God's work. We're doing right here talking to people about His creation and His babies. And when we're going out there, you're not going out there alone. You're going out there with the Lord, and you have the Holy Spirit. He will guide you, and you listen to the Spirit. And He will even help you pick the people you choose to talk to during that day. And this is such an amazing opportunity to share the gospel.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, it starts out talking about abortion, but you can keep it from going from the gospel, but with me, it goes to the gospel. And that's really the heart issue, is when you're looking at what the Lord thinks about this. And it's amazing to see how you can witness to people. And you're not going to change and be like all the time like saved on the spot or all this. But you're planting pebbles in people, and you're showing people the truth.
Yeah.
And that's, the Holy Spirit's going to back you up all the way in that.
Yeah.
Last thing I would say, the guys that made the Alpha 21 DVD, we watched it, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So he had a clip on his radio program the other day, radio TV program, whatever, what's his name? Kayla, help me, is it Chuck? Mark? The guy from Dallas Fort Worth that we were trying to bring up. He was saying, get ready for this, he said, now, the media is already in this mode because they bash Trump for everything that he does. He said, when abortion becomes illegal, and it will be, he said Roe v. Wade will be overturned. Just watch. All of the media is going to raise up the first back alley unsuccessful abortion. And they're going to raise this woman up, and she's going to be the poster.
Right? Yep.
So that's something to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for closing my closing thought, do you have anything you want to? As I said, it's being litigated all the time. There was a big abortion litigation today that we lost, and it's going to continue to be litigated. But here's the deal: as you're seeing, they're losing arguments. They've been getting their butts kicked. They're going to continue losing arguments. And as Dave just said, abortion will be illegal, and I'd bet the farm on it in our lifetime. Because of people like this, and we're going to go out and we're going to go start setting the narrative that's going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they're going to sit there and say, crap, we don't have an argument on this. And so when it does, and then we'll handle it from there. But my closing thought is basically this. One, be engaged in this, because this is what we're going to win on. And two, be praying for this every single day. And then three, and this is as Addie said, use this as an opportunity, and as combining with Kayla, it's an opportunity to, one, be in the ministry of reconciliation and healing and salvation, because this is an awesome opportunity to find some of the most broken people and one of the most hardest issues, and show them that Jesus loves them more than absolutely anything. And so use this, and again, if we can help, let us know. But with that, let me close in prayer. Father God, I thank you for everybody in here, Lord. I thank you that you have a plan. I thank you for the content of the night, Lord. I thank you that we get to use this information to go be change agents for you, Father. I pray, Lord Jesus, that you would give a divine appointments in our lives, Lord Jesus, as we go throughout this week to not only talk about this issue, but also to talk about your Son and salvation, Lord. Please help us to internalize this. Please give us great memory on not only this, but everything that we learn here. Father, I thank you for everyone in here. I thank you for the friendships. I thank you for the family that this is. I thank you for an opportunity to come and fellowship every week, Lord. Please go with us throughout the rest of this week. We love you, and in your name, amen.